White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki is back in the Twitter hot seat after an exchange with NPR reporter Mara Liasson about at-home COVID tests that went viral. Let's watch.
Look at what we've done over the course of time. We've quadrupled the size of our testing plan. We've cut the cost significantly over the past few months. And this effort to ensure insurers you're able to get your tests refunded means 150 million Americans will be able to get free tests.
Complicated though. Why not just make them free and give them out and have them available everywhere?
Should we just send one to every American?
Maybe.
Then what happens if every American has one test? How much does that cost, and then what happens after that?
All I know is that other countries seem to be making them available in greater quantities for less money.
Well, I think we share the same objective, which is to make them less expensive and more accessible, right? Every country's going to do that differently.
As the Boston Globe's Matt Carolian points out, UK citizens can, at no cost, order 1 7-pack of rapid COVID tests per day over the phone or online. Here to weigh in on the exchange is Briahna Joy Gray. She's the host of the Bad Faith podcast and former national press secretary for the Bernie Sanders campaign. Briahna, hello.
Thank you for having me.
So there's no aspect of the pandemic response effort on the part of the government that has been more disastrous than testing. There was the early screw up with the testing on the part of our national health officials. And still today, 2 years into the pandemic, nearly 2 years, we have a testing capacity well beneath or below or inferior to other peer nations because of how screwed up the approval process has been. You know, what does it say about us, about our government, that it can't? This isn't even really a matter of them providing something. They could just get out of the way and let people who make these tests give them to people. It would probably drive the cost down. What do you make of it?
Robbie, I don't know why you're complaining so much. Didn't you hear Jen Psaki say that through her Byzantine complicated plan, 150 million Americans out of 330 million Americans can get tests reimbursed by their insurance company? I really don't understand what the concern is here.
Right,
Look, obviously I'm being...
You have to go to a Dropbox and you'll get a test shipped to you sometime in 6 to 8 months, and then you just have to refund. Then they'll send you what government has to make. I mean, this is part of my ideology, but government makes everything so complicated and so difficult.
Well, here's the thing. It doesn't have to. And government is not a monolith. The reality is that, per the reporter in that exchange, other countries' governments that are able to avoid that Byzantine process because they're not co-opted by neoliberalism. The problem here isn't the idea of big government. It's the idea that our government is so overly invested in the idea of health insurance subsidies and private-public partnerships that it's not able to do what government is able to do best, which is lower the cost of products like this and distribute them directly to Americans. That's what's being done in other countries, and that's what was being demanded or offered up by the reporter as an alternative to the complicated Byzantine jump on one foot while citing the Pledge of Allegiance approach to this that's being taken currently.
And it's also not the case that inside the United States we don't know how to do this. So like last year, I lived in Vermont, which is part of the United States, even though it resisted becoming so in the very beginning. And if you wanted a COVID test, you either made an appointment at a nearby in Vermont is like 40 minutes away at a nearby testing facility, or you just showed up and then you got in a separate line and it was free, and they would email you your results. They would say within like 2 days, usually came within like a day. No paperwork required other than just filling out something online so they know who you are. It doesn't need to be as complicated as our kludgy system makes it. And on the matter of how to pay for the tests, Stephen Semler made this point on Twitter. He said, Jen Psaki asked, how do you pay for that regarding COVID-19 tests a week after advocating for the Build Back Better Act, which has a $285 billion tax cut for millionaires. And even setting that aside, it was initially a $3.5 trillion piece of legislation that's now down to $1.9 trillion. We don't lack the ability, and people talk about this in terms of dollars. We print our own dollars. The question is, can we produce tests and mail them to people if people need them? Like, you could just take money completely out of it. Do we have, as an economy, the capacity to produce tests and get them in people's hands? Briahna, what is it about the U.S. government that just gets in the way of that?
what it feels like in the case of so many things with COVID is an inability to disentangle oneself, or a lack of interest in disentangling oneself from the private insurance industry. So to talk about costs, the current plan is to have people's costs reimbursed through their insurance company, which, if everyone were insured, would be the same thing as paying for them, the government paying for them outright, right? What's the difference?
Yeah.
The difference is you have the middleman of this corporate entity. Moreover, you exclude everybody who isn't already insured, the most vulnerable members of our population already. That is what neoliberalism has wrought. That is this convoluted thinking that undermines our government's ability to do what it really should be handling best. And to your point, Ryan, there are these photographs famously of people in other countries in Europe using American tests that are marked at a lower rate than they're sold for here in our drugstores. I mean, I went with my mother before Thanksgiving to the CVS to buy a big stack of tests so that as family members trickled in over the course of the holiday week, we could all get tested. And I've spent $150 out of pocket buying these tests just so our family dinner could sit down and eat a meal. And we are lucky enough to be able to afford that kind of expense. But people who flippantly roll their eyes at the idea of bulk buying these $7, $12 tests are really out of touch. And there's been a lot of talk about elitism thrown around by critics of liberals right now, but it's an open field here. Neither party is being sufficiently attentive to the fact that these are huge expenses put on a population that's still very much suffering from not only the economic consequences of the COVID pandemic, but which were in a crisis beforehand, where half of Americans almost couldn't afford a $400 crisis. Now we're being asked to sign up for these crises day after day after day with little to no help from the government.
And also,
and the worst
COVID
part of it
is.
is.
Just real quick, COVID is most dangerous to people 65 and over. We happen to have a single-payer program for people 65 and over. What is it about Medicare that they just can't say, you know what? If you're covered by Medicare and you need a test, just hit us up. We got you.
Yeah.
I truly don't
the worst
know.
Part, and the other thing about this is I test all the time. I've been testing all the time throughout the pandemic. And they cost $150, $100 to $150 to go to a center and get a test. And not all insurance covers it. My insurance will not cover it unless I think I have been exposed to COVID. So they have certain parameters as to when they'll actually cover the test. Now, luckily, they finally do have in the drugstores those tests that you're talking about, Briahna, and I also have a stack of them, and they're about $12.50 a test because you get 2 in the pack. They're like $25 or $24 a pack. And, in Europe, I have friends that are over there. They're saying that they're able to get access to their tests for $5, €5 a test, and they're everywhere. There's no lack of access. I went to my local drugstore. They were out.
But they have access to tests that are manufactured here that our government has not approved. My solution is just, so step one, we abolish the FDA, then we salt the earth where the building once was so that no regulatory entity can grow in the ground. And then there are going to be a lot of tests on the market, and then the price of the test will come down via competition. We don't have to do this cumbersome funding thing. They'll line the shelves with COVID tests.
We don't even need to do that.
Solved.
We have free vaccines. Why can't we have free tests? We know that you need to be tested in order to be safe. Like what you did, Briahna, that's what I always do. I always test. It doesn't matter a person's vaccination status. To me, you test because you could be spreading COVID and you've got 95-year-old grandparents or 65-year-old parents or whatever, and you want to make sure that they're staying safe. So if they really, truly had an investment in wanting to keep those hospitalizations down, they would be giving us access to these tests. And yet they doubled down on the vaccines. They're now paying for boosters for the vaccines, but they're not paying for tests. This doesn't make any sense.
Well, to Robbie's point, the reality is that the FDA is America's regulatory system is one of the few that's respected simpatico for other countries in the world, right? So if something has FDA approval, other countries will forgo the approval process and go ahead and trust ours. That's very rare, and certainly we're not saying, some drug got approved in some other country, and so we're going to respect that here. And I think there's a lot of integrity to our scientific institution to the FDA as a regulatory body. However, the problem here is political. The problem here is that the same exact tests that are being sold on American shelves are being sold in other countries in Europe for a fraction of the price because their government is subsidizing those costs. You have the exact same tests that are being sold in CVS in America for $12, $20 that are being sold in Germany for $2, but being distributed also for free. And that is the key, distributed for free, because people understand and other places, the benefit, to your point, about actually getting testing and that preventative prophylactic layer of this.
Right.
Well, there should be reciprocity, and everything approved. If it's approved in the UK, if it's approved in Germany, it should be approved here. We should just have put a warning label on it. The FDA has not approved this, but all of our peer countries are doing it, and it's fine. That if that satisfies our extremely risk-averse bureaucracy.
Right, and the big pharma has lobbied heavily against that. That was even a condition of the Affordable Care Act to get their support that we would continue to ban that. So they've built walls up around this. But in conclusion, in Vermont, the tests are free, no questions asked, no insurance needed. Briahna, thank you so much for joining us.
Ryan, sponsored by Big Vermont.
That's right. Big Green Mountain. We'll have more Rising right after this.